Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. It really is a pleasure to have this opportunity, even though it's, you know, these times we all feel like I'm just going to share my screen, that we all are wanting and seeking professional learning and development in these times, and it's great to get the opportunity to present, although it's in a slightly different way than face to face. It's fantastic to be able to have this opportunity. So, as Kathleen said, there is a poll in the chat, and it would be great to see where everybody is joining us from today. I just had a quick glance at the chat as people were arriving, and for some of you, I know it's very, very late at night. It's actually late afternoon here in Zurich, so it's a very civilized time. But really, thank you for joining wherever you're joining from, and I hope that the timing for you isn't too brutal. So my name is Liz Hargreaves, and I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning of Education, at Intercommunity School in Zurich. I'm presenting this workshop on behalf of our educational leadership team, and I will be joined today by my special guest and colleague and researcher with Round Square, Lydia Eckstein, who will be talking to us about character education. And we'll also be joined by two of our ICSZ students who will give their thoughts on perspectives on leadership and becoming advocates for change. So here's a campus shot of our school here in Zurich. I must say it doesn't look anything like that today, as we've just had our first snowfall. And it's actually a very wintry November evening. So just to let you know, if you just coming into this section, that there is a poll so that we can see where people are joining from and the positions that they hold in their schools and organisations. And we'll have a look at the results later on when people have had a chance to respond. I'm sure that there's a great diversity of people here, which is awesome. And the experience that we've designed hopefully allows some reflection throughout the presentation and some takeaways for everyone. So we'll catch up at the end of the session with any questions. We're delighted that you've chosen to join us on this Impact on Learning, Measuring What Matters workshop. And we hope that you find it of interest and relevance to your own school or context. This presentation was designed to focus from a systems perspective on two of the conference pathways and strategic priorities at our school also, assessment of learner impacts and professional learning. We'll also include a snapshot of how the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting on our work in these critical areas. As schools have discovered during all the disruption this year, the campus closures, reopening and closing and reopening, it hasn't only tested our agility in operational planning, delivery and communication, but it's also tested our capacity to lean into our mission and values in order to try to find the firm ground that is so desperately needed in challenging times. I'm sure many of you have been asked to write an article or give an interview or take part in a panel, virtual of course, about how your own schools have responded to the pandemic. And so we would like to share some of our reflections on how it has impacted not only on our operational, logistical and practical aspects, but also on our educational strategy. So we'd like to invite you now on our school's journey. We'll be looking at some of the research that has inspired us to create learning indicators to measure impact on student learning. And we'll also share our cultural competencies, which define a set of professional practices that we all aspire to in our daily interactions with one another at our school. We'll share some of the successes and ongoing challenges that we're experiencing in a variety of situations across our community. And there'll be an opportunity for you to explore some of the tools to see if they might be transferable to your own school context. Some samples of our documentation will be available, such as our ICSZ learning indicators and our ICSZ cultural competencies, which may be helpful for you to use or adapt with your own teams, individuals, and schools as a whole. And I would just like to go now quickly to the poll and see if, Kathleen, I don't know if you're still there or if you can hear me. Are we able to show the results? I'm not seeing that option. We'll perhaps come back to that later on. Okay. So over the past 6 years at the Intercommunity School in Zurich, we have referenced various theoretical frameworks in an attempt to connect the abstract to the concrete and theory to practice. We set out in an intentional and structured manner, and often in messy and organic ways, to support a culture shift across the school. We believed that this shift had to be authentically driven and not a strategic top-down mandate. To generate the sense of ownership and participation that it deserved, it had to be a co-constructed, self-directed collaborative effort amongst all members of the community. Could viewing the school as a complex ecosystem, unique to its own context, enhance the quality of learning across the whole community? We knew that in the past we had experienced silos, fragmented planning by area, by department, etc. And so it was our intent at the start of a new strategic planning period in 2019, last year, to ensure that the whole school thinking and planning became more systems-based and holistic. We believed from our research and findings that if our collective efforts across the school could be viewed as multiple connections, then that this would allow us to enhance the learning experience for our students. In this reality, it was okay to have divergent pockets of thinking across the school, as long as they were connected. So in order for this to work, we had to ensure that the change processes occurred at many levels of intervention and that they would be multi-tiered and distributed from the top down, the bottom up, inside out, and outside in. And we knew that given all the work we'd undertaken in complexity thinking and coherence making, and the adaptive schools framework and our workshops on cognitive coaching, along with all the research around metacognition and character education and well-being, that any one standalone initiative only thrived if it was embedded in a holistic, human-centered ecosystem within the school. Here is a sample of the readings that I mentioned. And if we go now to the Padlet, this is a screenshot, and you should be able to access this Padlet either through the QR code or via the link. which is has actually been posted in the notes section and the chat, I believe. So I'm just going to come out of there for one moment and have a look. Yeah, the Padlet is there. So if you want to access that either by the QR code, and then you can see aha, I didn't respond to the poll. Is that why I can't see the results? Let's have a look. Okay. All right, so we'll just spend a few more minutes in the Padlet environment, and we will come back to it again throughout this workshop. Okay, so coming back into the presentation, you'll see from the Padlet that we have housed many of our resources there, which you can access and read at your leisure. We've also posted some reflective questions in the first column, which you will be also able to answer and discuss in your teams. And if you have any questions for us, if you could use the right-hand side column, that would be really helpful. The best thing about this is that we'll be able to capture and keep everything all in one place, and it won't hopefully disappear throughout the ongoing stream of the chat. Okay, so just go back to the slides and we can go forward here. So our systems thinking research had led us to focus on encompassing a more holistic vision of learning in the new iteration of our strategic plan. In this phase of strategic planning, we were trying to really get to the heart of student learning, not knowledge, dispositions, and values that will develop students in becoming responsible, successful citizens, but importantly, the elements that encompass learning in all its dimensions: the intellectual, the creative, moral, social, experiential, and entrepreneurial dimensions. This pushed us deeply to think deeply, first and foremost, about the purpose of education. As fellow educators, you will appreciate, it seems, we're always trying to streamline and declutter our typically complicated processes in schools, such as curriculum. However, we would argue that if there is one thing we should not oversimplify, and that is the purpose or the why. Growing future generation is very complex, and so therefore the purpose of education is also complex. And so as we started to consider our purpose as an international inter-community school in Switzerland, we began to question how we were nurturing children and young adults to develop as ethical, compassionate, and agentic people. People with capacity for metacognitive and critical thinking, and people who were caring and kind. How were we growing people of character? This human focus on growing people was supported by a character education research project that had been undertaken a few years prior by our in-house researcher, Lydia XI. I'd like to introduce you to her now, speaking in a video about her remit and functions as an in-house researcher, and also on broadly on the value of character education in our schools.
Hello, my name is Lydia Eckstein, and I was the character education researcher at the Intercommunity School in Zurich. I've always had a passionate interest in student voice, character education and experiential learning, in placing equal value on both the affective and cognitive learning made sense to me. So placing the whole child in the centre of the learning system, really. Although I worked at ICS for a number of years, I joined the ICS character education journey in 2016-2017. It was the first year of a 3-year research project, and I was invited to work with the ICS educational leadership team. This research project was set against a backdrop of growing evidence demonstrating the pivotal role character education, social emotional literacy, and well-being play in equipping students with the skills to flourish, not only as individuals, but also as members of their communities. So taking a concept, character education, that seemed intangible and breaking it down and connecting our new understanding with our practice within the school was fascinating. What was even more exciting was to see how this knowledge translated into strategic planning, informed practice, and has enhanced student voice and agency at ICS. In our first year of the project, we harvested research from schools, universities, governments, and we worked together as a team to unpack the meaning and build our collective understanding. We are an IB school and a Round Square school, and the philosophies underpinning these organisations supported us as we then drew from Positive Education, CASEL, CASEL, the Collaborative for Social and Emotional Learning, BIA, Institute of Character, and the Jubilee Centre to align our beliefs in pro-social, engaging, and constructive learning experiences for the students in our school. So what we came up with was our understanding that at ICS we believe that character education is the explicit development of virtues and moral, ethical discipline within the school. The ethos of the school and the structures and the pedagogy that uphold the ethos work in harmony to empower students to identify what is ethically important. So supporting students to make the right choice at the right time for the right reasons is a foundation stone of our beliefs. The next step, the second year, was to look inwards. How are we supporting students as they developed their ethical identities? What vehicles did we have within the school that supported effective growth? Our second year was all about mapping. Now that we had a clear conceptual understanding, we wanted to connect research and knowledge on character education with practices within ICS. We wondered about the vehicles that had grown up within the school and how these could be harnessed. And this was where the mapping took place. The final year of the project was focused on action. We felt confident in our understanding of the research and our practices and vehicles, essentially understanding who we were using the lens of character education. We created two documents that frame our thinking on character and guide our practice as a school are the ICS Strategic Plan 2019-2024 and the ICS Educational Research Report. Capturing our journey was important, but I think foremost what's important to us is the deliberate focus that ICS, the school, has placed on the development of the effective skills and virtues that build character. We want all of our students to feel part of an inclusive community based on respect. We try to engender a sense of self-worth within each child so that they're able to feel that their views are heard and they can express their views and understand that their participation in discussions about the future of their learning and the future of the school is valued. Thank you.
So thank you to Lydia, and just also to remind you that the documents that she was referring to and that we've been referring to throughout this workshop can be found in the Padlet. Around the same time as our work on character education, we were also working with Oach and Powell on an action research project inside the school on metacognition. This really supported our view of holistic education and has led to a deeper understanding of the connections between the metacognitive and character pieces. And this in turn has helped us create mechanisms for identifying and supporting students of exceptional capacity and the development of our extension and enrichment programme. So all of our research on systems thinking and our relentless focus on holistic education provided the foundations for our plan, with 4 key goals directly related to teaching, caring, and learning. Goal 1 is all around what we teach and learn in terms of curriculum re-envisioning and multiliteracies. Goal 2 is character education and well-being. Who are we? Goal 3, conceptual learning, all about how we learn, where the metacognition piece fits there. And goal 4, authentic assessment, how we know we're having an impact on learning. For each of our 4 goals, we identified an impact on learning statement, which, as we shall see next, has really pushed us to find evidence to support any impact we hope to have. And this quote sums it up, and I think this was one that we discussed a number of times in numerous contexts around the school. But really, at the end of the day, if you're not really collecting evidence of impact on student learning, then you're really just having some nice conversations around learning that may not be going anywhere. Like all schools, we gather copious amounts of data throughout the course of a year. And like many schools, we have tended to lean toward the things that are easy to measure. For example, the quantitative, hard evidence such as IB results or standardized scores, and many of the points you can see in the assessment data column in the slide. It seemed fairly obvious that holistic education demands multidimensional evidence of learning in a holistic data stream. This quest for evidence of impact on learning really led us to take a hard critical look at the measures in our strategic plan. And a closer look revealed that a large proportion of the evidence was based on foundational measures and not really focused on the impact of learning at all. We came to the realization that we needed to shift from measuring the outputs to measuring the impacts, and that we would have to incorporate many qualitative and multidimensional data in order to achieve a richer and more holistic perspective. So to illustrate this shift from measuring outputs to impacts, we'd like to share a few examples directly taken from our strategic plan. Our character education and wellbeing goal is a key priority of the school strategic plan for both students and teachers. As a 3-program IB school, we can look at evidence from ATLs, approaches to learning, and climate surveys or culture of care surveys that we have at the school. However, they do give us a retrospective snapshot rather than diagnostic. We know that learning is enhanced when students feel happy and safe, and that developing skills that promote self-awareness impacts on their well-being for their entire lives. And so we have a wide array of efforts in our schools aimed at helping students to succeed academically, socially, and emotionally. But it can be very hard to keep track of how individual students are really doing. We've recently identified Flourish as a potential tool at our school, as it offers many aspects that we're looking for. For example, the data and feedback has longevity, and the integration of it can support staff and students in the long term. The feedback data is affirming and encourages participants to take ownership of their well-being. So this could enhance our own knowledge of health and well-being as teachers with integrated guidance. But we've had to rethink that due to the fact that it's coming out of Australia, it isn't necessarily GDPR compliant. And so if any of you are using a similar tool or a program in your schools, perhaps you could make a note of that in the Padlet. It would be great to share and to see what other programs or other tools other people are using for this very important area. Another example of how we are trying to move from outputs to impacts is our authentic assessment goal. Like many international schools, we have an assessment policy which served as foundational indicator. However, this didn't give us the evidence as to whether students were actually experiencing authentic assessment and developing as agentic, assessment capable and responsible learners. An assessment literacy survey we've developed based on our assessment policy, where our teachers could self-assess against the practices, as you can see in the right-hand side of this slide. It gave us evidence of impact from a teacher perspective, but what about the learner experience? What about the student perspective? So we decided to ask ourselves whether any of this was having or likely to have any impact on our students and their learning. As highlighted in this slide, we had developed a series of student surveys from the Whole School Math Literacy Project that asked students specifically about what effective and less effective assessment practices looked like for them in the classroom. Not only did this give rich feedback to teachers, it really enabled us to understand the experience of authentic assessment from the student perspective. And if any of you have run any of these kinds of surveys in your own school, I hope like me, or hope like us, you found that students actually, it's almost as if they've read all the research on whatever it is you're asking them, and they can speak to the nuances of real best practices in assessment. We certainly found that with our students. And additionally, student feedback from our re-envisioned concept of student council, now called Student Bridge at our school, has provided us with actionable data points. And my colleague, James Penston, has a workshop on this tomorrow that highlights all the work our secondary team continue to do in this area. So from a systems perspective, we started with a backwards design approach, which led us to move beyond our policy documents, like our assessment policy and so on, and also move on from our teacher perspectives as a mean to measure our outputs toward a more considered focus on the learning experiences of all our students in real time for them in order to measure impact, namely impact on their learning. So we'll pause for a few minutes now so that we can reflect, and we'd like to ask you, in your role and in your context, where do you see the value of impact on learning indicators? And who or what could support you in developing and applying impact on learning indicators. And if you access the Padlet, you should be able to, if you wish, share some of your thinking there. If you just entered the session, we're just pausing to reflect on where we see the value of impact on learning indicators, or how you might go about developing those or applying impact on learning indicators in your school. And there's a Padlet has been posted in the chat if you want to access our resources and you want to answer any of the reflective questions in the chat. Or if you have a question, you can also pose your question there. I can see a few people are adding their comments. And the Padlet will stay open, so if you don't have time now, then you can always go back to it later on and see whatever other people are saying. Okay, so, and there's a snapshot of the Padlet. A QR code if you want to access it via your phone. So our systems thinking research also led us to scrutinise another system in our school, the professional and learning and growth of our staff. Our vision for holistic education needed to be complemented by professionals who were self-directed, could think flexibly, strategically, and who were capable of role modelling the character education virtues we hoped our students would develop. We needed to move away from a top-down, directed professional appraisal process and create distinct stages that supported our staff in self-directed appraisal, professional growth, feedback, and, if necessary, a more formal process of evaluation. Our questions led us to re-envision our professional learning and growth framework so that it described how we were accompanying our staff while keeping learning at the core. And we were trying to keep an eye on the big picture of professional learning and growth whilst grappling with the granules of daily life. Following a deep dive into the concept of leadership with our staff, we then went on to develop a profile of a professional at ICSZ that would fit with this. And in this slide, you can see that this profile of a professional manifested itself in our cultural competencies, seen as a snapshot here. And they describe our ICSZ community when we are all functioning at an optimum or as our best adult selves. These cultural competencies were based on our leadership philosophy and the concept that everyone is a leader because there is always someone that we're influencing. They were developed collaboratively with broad input from staff and reference various external resources such as adaptive schools, the Strengths Finder domains, and you can see them in more detail in our resources section in the Padlet. And they're used practically to shape conversations with aspiring leaders in our school. The backstory on how these were developed can be found in the Padlet also, and this was actually featured in an ICSZ Global Insights article in April last year in 2019. Another important strand of this conversation was naturally related to growing our aspiring leaders and encouraging new leaders. I'd like to introduce two of our students now who are talking about leadership development from their perspective. Okay, thank you. And I'd like to share another example.
As a school, I think that more than ever, we're being open-minded and progressive in our outlook on learning and diversity. And I think that ethical leadership workshops have really been part of a larger effort to build a culture of respect, kindness, and understanding. Personally, I've learned that many of the conflicts that we face in social, school, or wider world contexts stem from a lack of understanding. And as we discussed at the Bring Your Difference conference last year, we really need to appreciate and celebrate our differences, as well as find ways to collaborate and maximize each other's valuable character strengths. Learning about my own character strengths was, at the time, enlightening, and with hindsight, not surprising, but it has definitely given me a stronger sense of identity.
Thank you. So thank you to both our students there for sharing how learning about ethical leadership has supported their development as young leaders and the ways that they can influence positive change in different contexts. So we were just getting into our first year of implementing our impact on learning indicators, and it seemed our work was nicely mapped out for the next few years. Then in January, coronavirus dropped the bombshell that would change all our lives. No more planning backwards from an elegant plan. We were thrown into a spin of what do we need to do now? So just as we aspire to take a systems approach to planning in normal times, we took a similar approach in the new normal. Like most international and national schools all over the world, we have at the heart of our mission to develop self-directed, independent, responsible learners. I'm sure many of you have that as part of your mission or vision. And at no other times have we seen this enacted by our students so visibly. In speaking with students, many appreciated the increased flexibility in pacing that an online or learning at home environment brought them. They could go deeper with concepts, do further research independently to enrich their learning, and not to mention the huge bonus in flexibility in timing, choosing when you can work on your projects or when you can crash out with a Netflix film. They enjoyed the balance and comfort of working from home, where they could juggle and enjoy their hobbies alongside their learning. The online learning environment also brought digital literacy to the fore, as students quickly learned to develop the self-awareness in order to flourish and stay sane in this new online environment, and managing their screen time and so on. It also caused a rethink from staff on moving from creating learning activities to a playbook approach, where students could select a pathway rather than laboriously trudge develop through activities. It's boosted assessment and feedback as teachers have found new ways and developed mechanisms to support the ongoing assessment piece and the formative. Our partnerships with parents have certainly been strengthened, where learning in the daily work of teaching and learning in the classroom has truly become very visible. And we spent time and energy supporting parents in supporting the learning of their children at home whilst they were juggling their own work. And the ongoing situation and impact on humanity might not be over for some time. However, we can, with cautious optimism, hopefully see some positives emerge. We've truly appreciated the incredible resilience and adaptability of our students, the unparalleled ingenuity and professionalism of our staff, and with a laser-like focus on learning and well-being, we've found new ways to make our educational strategy more sustainable. And in many ways, we've been reminded of the ethical responsibility of schools and how important, and importantly, how this pandemic will continue to shift our thinking about what school is for, both now and into the future. So just to summarize, we hope that this workshop has given you an opportunity to explore some insights into our approaches here at ICS and some of the successes and ongoing challenges that we're experiencing in a variety of situations for you to explore further and see if they might be transferable to your own school context. This is an interesting view in terms of looking at some of the NEASC learning principles and considering, what degree does our educational strategy and strategic plan have learning impacts or learning indicators that do these things. Might be interesting to explore and see how you would rate your school. And so after today's workshop, whether it's the middle of the night for some of you now, or whether it's still the early morning or the late afternoon like it is here in Zurich, what are some ideas that have been presented here that you will take back to your organisation or your school? Maybe think of 3 things you'd like to focus on in the near future, or think of one thing that you could start. I'd like to add your questions, comments to the Padlet, then that would be great opportunity, be a great way to share. Okay, so that concludes the presentation piece of this workshop. And if I go to have a look at I'm just looking to see if there are any questions. Request you to elaborate on a playbook approach. Oh, that's a good question. A playbook approach, and if you want to message me, is if you want more specific information, is where instead of giving a linear set of activities or activities that students work through one after the other, a playbook allows students to enter into, select and choose a specific activity depending on where they are with their goal setting. And let me just go back to the Padlet again to see what other questions we might have. How often should assessment happen and what tools should be used? I think all the tools need to develop so that they're fit for purpose. So if you're really trying to get an understanding of student learning and their perspective on whether there's any impact, you would need on a fairly regular basis to harvest those instances or moments of truth almost. What were some of the barriers you've encountered and what helped you overcome them? I think you'll probably notice from our strategic plan that it is actually holistic education is at the heart, and it is extremely comprehensive. And I think one of the challenges that we all face is how we manage gathering and harvesting really valuable information about students, what they say the impact on their learning is, without causing and creating an incredible amount of work for everybody involved. And I think, as I said earlier, we actually had just started to consider how we might measure some of these impacts and what the learning indicators might be. And sometimes it's as simple as feedback, and other times it might be a mechanism that you need to corroborate with other tools that you might be using, whether it's one such as Flourish that we talked about earlier, or one that you haven't discovered yet. So it's making and keeping it all manageable. One of the key things around data in our schools is how we don't overload ourselves in terms of collecting and gathering and then stumbling because there is so much that we're not even sure where we're going to start in terms of what do we do with it next. I'm just checking any other comments that have come through there. I think we have a question about, can you be specific and how you or your teachers employ the playbook approach? Can you give us a tangible experience with a specific lesson? There's a lot of detail there. If you want to email me directly, then we can share some examples with you, or perhaps we can even comment in the Padlet. I'm looking at the time, and I know that Kathleen will be coming back any minute in order to run through some housekeeping and to give you some directions on the next sessions.
Okay, thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you very much. That was right on cue, and I couldn't even see that you're going to pop up.
That was a really great, informative presentation, and it was wonderful that you were able to actively engage everyone in a virtual world. So we really appreciate that. There were lots of ideas that people can certainly transfer and use in their schools from the information that you gave. So we really appreciate all of the information that you put forward this morning. And
Thank
also
you.
the contact info that you've left people with, so that if they want to get in touch with you, they can, to ask you more questions. So thanks so much for everything. So we thank you all for attending. And again, thank you so much, Liz, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
See you on the other side.
Yes. Bye.